All right, welcome everybody to the California Small Farm Conference. We're at day 3 here, and we're getting ready to dive into dry farming practices and perspectives. So thank you so much for being here, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists and presenters. This is a really important topic in a place like California, where if we're not in drought, we're in flood, and apparently now we're in blizzards as well. So it's a strange, crazy world of California weather, and dry farming is just one practice of resilience that we're going to hear about today. So just want to encourage people to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves, ask questions, share resources or comments, and otherwise enjoy the workshop. We hope to see you throughout the rest of the conference. And Yvonne, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much, Evan. And thanks, as always, to Kat for putting on this workshop. It's always an amazing way to get to connect with people and share some of these ideas around. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. So hopefully everyone can see the slideshow. I'm so excited to be here today with this amazing group of panelists. So I'm going to try to keep my part of this pretty brief. We're going to give just a quick introduction to what dry farming is, sort of what it means in California's context, and then we'll let everyone on the panel introduce themselves, hear a little bit about the research that Jared and I are doing, and then open it up to general questions. We have some sort of prepared to have a conversation with these great panelists, and also we'd love to take audience questions. So again, please do feel free to put those in the chat, and we're excited to hear from you. So starting off, just to get everyone roughly on the same page here, I want to talk about what dry farming is. And most broadly, I think of dry farming as sort of any agriculture where you're not using irrigation or sort of water as an input other than what falls from the sky. And when you're farming at with some sort of water limitations. So obviously there are rain-fed systems where there's just enough water to grow crops as they sort of normally would grow, and that's not quite dry farming either. We're thinking about plants that are water stressed in some way. And there are lots of incredible examples of dry farming from throughout history and from around the world. One that I think is particularly well known in the US is Hopi dry farming in Northeast Arizona. And that is a system, they get very little rain there, and it is a very impressive and culturally important system of dry farming. And it's also pretty different from the kind of dry farming that we're going to be talking about today because of the rain and weather patterns. So want to also point out, if you look at this is called a climograph here, and you can see it starts in January over on the left here, and then all the way on the right goes to December. And even though there are only 9 or 10 inches of rain in this area of Arizona where Hopi dry farming happens, the majority of that rain falls in July and August. And so you can see in this photo up here, there are these monsoonal rain events, and that is the water that is used to help these Hopi dry farm plants grow. And we can compare that to what's happening in California. So as we all know, rainfall pattern is exactly the inverse here, especially on the Central Coast, or up and down the coast. We have folks here from Humboldt as well, where we're all thinking about farming. There is absolutely no rain in the summer. So the way that this farming system functions is that farmers have to build the soil water holding capacity such that you can sort of refill the soil water bank in the winter and be able to use that moisture that's stored in the ground to get your crops through the summer. And this is actually a practice that has its history in Italy, which makes sense. It's sort of the original Mediterranean climate. And there were Italian growers who brought dry farming tomato practices here to the Central Coast. And this management system has sort of grown from there. So let's see. In California, dry farming is dependent obviously on precipitation, and there are sort of thresholds of how much winter precipitation you need in order to make a dry farming system possible. There's also, of course, the humidity and heat and all of these things that are going to play important roles as well. But just looking at this map here, you can see why it's true that the farmers here today are from coastal regions, because the sort of common wisdom that I've heard from farmers is that you need at least 20 inches of precipitation a year in order to be able to sort of think about successfully dry farming. And that's going to be happening predominantly in sort of anywhere that's light green or more blue than that on this map of California is an area that has enough rain to maybe consider dry farming. And on the left, I have a picture. It's not just, of course, the rain itself, but you can see this beautiful marine layer, the fog coming through on the fields that are doing dry farming here. And that moisture in the air is also really important to consider dry farming as well, even if it's not actively precipitating. And the one other thing that I'll point out about this photo is that you can see there's these tomatoes in the background here, which are the things that are actually being dry farmed on this field. But I think it does a nice job of representing the diverse management practices that farmers are using to allow these dry farm systems to thrive. So the tomatoes are kind of in the background in a sense, and it's about the whole broader diversified system that allows these management techniques to thrive. And I don't think that we really need this slide. We all understand that there is a drought that's happening and that this has happened before. California is in a time of pretty variable rainfall and pretty extreme droughts. And like this article at the bottom says here, even there, despite some recent rainfall, the drought, that doesn't mean that the drought is over. So we're at a time when thinking about water conservation and farming practices that involve lower water inputs are really at the front of everyone's minds. And just to give a little bit of a clearer picture, at least to dry farm tomatoes, and we'll get to hear from some other folks who are practicing other dry farm systems. These systems typically work with extremely limited water inputs. That doesn't mean that there's literally zero irrigation going onto these dry farm fields. There might be 1 to 2 irrigation events at the very beginning of the season just to get everything established, especially in a year where we don't have rainfall like we do now. And you just need to give the plants a little bit of something to get them going at the beginning of the season. And like I was saying, it relies on the soil water bank that gets refilled over the winters in the climates that we're working in. And it requires certain varieties and species of plants that are well adapted to drought. So tomatoes work especially well because they have incredibly deep roots. Even in one season, a tomato can send roots down 3 meters or more. And we'll be talking about other varieties that are especially, other species and varieties that are especially well adapted to dry farming contexts. And then also a suite of management practices. And I'm excited for the farmers here today to get to tell you more about exactly what those are. But there are plenty of ways to manage a farm that will make dry farming more possible to contemplate. And the one last thing that I want to say before we start with some panelist introductions is that beyond just the rainfall constraints, if you look at the clay content in the soil and the temperatures in the summer and precipitation in the winter, I tried to sort of add these all together into this map here. And you can see that so anywhere in blue or orange is an area that is currently cropland that could be suitable for dry farming. And I want to say, of course, that this doesn't mean that I think that all of these areas should be dry farmed, but it's just something that even could be possible to think about. And that's all centered on the coast here. So I also just always like to start out talks like this, pointing out that when we're talking about dry farming vegetables and fruits, a glaring hole obviously is the whole Central Valley, which is not particularly well suited to that practice. We could have a different conversation about dry farming small grains or doing reduced irrigation as opposed to full dry farming. But the areas that are able to do like sort of vegetable dry farming as we're thinking of it today are definitely more concentrated in these coastal areas. And so with that, hopefully everyone has enjoyed this very quick crash course in dry farming. And I'm so excited to pass it over to our panelists. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and just talk a little bit, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, about who you are, where you're working, what your connection is to dry farming. And then Jared and I will give quick little research report backs, and we'll open it up to a broader panel. So we're going to go in alphabetical order by last name. You can quickly figure out where you are in the order. And we're going to be starting with Jim. So Jim, I'll pass it to you. And here's the photo.
Okay, I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay? Good?
Yes, you're great.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was a small farmer in the Central Valley, starting in, well, through the 80s, and took the position, farm manager position at UC Santa Cruz in 1990. And it was interesting because I was a tomato grower in the Central Valley, and I figured my move to the coast I'd be walking away from all my tomatoes, and I almost didn't take the job because of that, because I really like tomatoes. But so I get to the coast, I get to Santa Cruz, the UC campus, where there's a 25-acre research and teaching farm that I am now responsible for. And I hooked up with Molino Creek Farming Collective, just out of Davenport, there north of Santa Cruz, and they were doing dry farm tomatoes. They had learned from some of their dry farming techniques from their previous landowner, and there's a lot of knowledge of dry farming, a lot of on the Central Coast, between, well, in the Half Moon Bay, Pescadero area. There's a lot of old Italian farmers that brought dry farming techniques from the Mediterranean. So anyway, long story short, I learned how to dry farm from Molino Creek. And that first year that I was there in 1990, we planted a small plot of early girl tomatoes, and they just did phenomenally well. And the flavor was 100 times better than anything I had ever eaten in the Central Valley, you know, with all those sun-drenched tomatoes and all the different varieties that these early girls just beat them. So I've been sold ever since that experience, and I have since moved on from UC Santa Cruz and have my own little place, and we do a lot of dry farming. I picked a soil type and a location that was conducive to dry farming, and so we dry farm, not commercially, but just kind of on a homestead scale. We dry farm Hopi corn and tomatoes and beans and garbanzos and a number of different crops, including winter squash. And so anyway, yeah, that's my brief introduction, and we can move on.
Great, thanks so much, Jim. Next we have Veronica Mazariegos Anastasio, and these beautiful photos from your farm. Take it away.
Thank you, Yvonne. Right, so my name is Veronica Vero, and I'm one of the 3 founding farmers of Brisa Ranch. Right, this image, the larger one sort of situates you. We're right against the hills of Santa Cruz Mountains, and like on the other side, behind the photographer here, is the ocean. And so, and we, or even our namesake Brisa, which in our area refers to foggy mist, is very much part of our, like we named our farm this way because it's such a big part of our farming system. Cole, who's at the very top right, showing some winter squash, pumpkin winter squash, which is like our first crop that we started growing almost 6 years ago. Myself at the bottom with one of our other important crops, our cover crops that we put annually, and then Cristobal in the center, sort of holding our heart-shaped dry farm tomato, which, right, following with what Jim was mentioning, following the tradition of the Central Coast area, is predominantly the main crop that we dry farm, and also looking to see what else we can do. And so I chose the picture of our potato beds, which we grow a diversified system of vegetables and fruits, but potatoes is another crop that we have already started to experiment with dry farming, and definitely have more work to do. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Vero. Next we're gonna have Jock.
Okay. My name is Jacques Newcomb, and I'm up in Humboldt County. I'm about an hour from the coast on the Trinity River at 520 feet elevation. I started farming about 29 years ago, and in the Willow Creek Valley. And I have even though I'm on a beautiful river and there's springs on the hillside, I have like very little access to water. I started off farming other people's land, so it wasn't conducive to drill wells or anything like that. So some of the acreage I'm on, I have no access to water. So I had to figure out how to make a living. And so the top picture with the dog in it, that is carrots and corn. The picture below it is that's the Arcata Farmers Market, and that's about 50% of my income comes from that market. And that picture is taken half an hour before starting time, and that's pretty much everybody in that line is waiting for our peaches and tomatoes. And that's pretty much a half an hour before market. That's pretty much every single customer, and they're waiting in our line. You can also see the picture of my daughter eating a dry farmed watermelon, a carrot, and the peaches. Pretty much everything I grow, I kind of consider myself like a sugar man, and dry farming just makes the product totally superior. So one way or another, I figured it out. If it's profitable or not, that's a different story. So right now, like my big crops are, sweet corn, any fruit crop, and melons. Those are my big things that I dry farm. I also do 2 acres in tomatoes, but I do water those a little. That said, I'm doing 19 acres with vineyards, and 2 acres in vines, 10 acres in orchard, 6 to 7 acres in row crops, and I use less water than the average homeowner in my town. My entire farm is run off a 5/8 inch community domestic water supply. That's it.
That's amazing. Thanks, Jock.
Yeah.
All right, next up, we're gonna have Blake Richard.
Howdy. All right, so I'm up in Humboldt, but I'm down on the coast. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great.
You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm on the coast, and we use land, along the coast in different places. We're growing quinoa and potatoes and beets and squash, hard squash. Those are the main things we're growing. We're growing, quinoa and potatoes on pretty big scales. And we've been dry farming those exclusively, even though we do wonder about if it might be better to irrigate them. It's something that we constantly wonder about. And we have experimented with irrigating parts of our potatoes before, and the yields definitely are more. And so we wonder, there's obviously all kinds of reasons you dry farm, all kinds of variables to consider. But it's something we wonder about with our potatoes because we feel like we probably could get better yields. So we rent land, lots of different land, and because we kind of get moved around. And so we've experimented, experienced lots of different types of soils with our dry farming, in particular with quinoa. And it's been really interesting to see the differences with dry farming in the different soil types. We're right on the coast, and so for a warm day for us, is 75 degrees. That's like a hot day for us, pretty much. It's one of the kind of observations we've made that's been interesting in that we find that obviously what's really important is you have a deep soil. Depth is real important for the soil to be deep with dry farming, but we've really found that we have an easier time with it when the soil is sandy as opposed to clay, which kind of goes contrary to what you might intuitively think. And I kind of just think about the beach. When you go to the beach, you know, if you kick the very top layer of sand at the beach, you notice that it's moist right underneath. It's really easy to create, to get that, the water wicking, and it creates its own dust mulch. Sand does, just really easily by itself without any specific management methods. Whereas the heavier your soil gets, we find we have to be more careful with our management to make sure that we get just the right amount of, you know, loose soil right on the surface. But we also have to be extra careful about packing the rest of it below the surface, very firm, to make sure the wicking and the you know, the moisture can move upward easily. So it's been interesting working with all the different types of soils. And so I guess that's basically the simple overview of my world. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Blake. All right. Next, we're going to have Silas. Take it away.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. So I manage a farm for College of the Redwoods up in Humboldt County. We're a community college, and our farm is located along the Eel River, a little inland. I'd say it's kind of in between Jocks and Blake, where we have that coastal fog in the morning, and then it gets, you know, heated up into the 80s. So I've been there since 2018, and I didn't know that much about dry farming prior to this, except for I knew it was done at the farm and our area of Shively was known. Some of you might recognize the name Bill Reynolds, pretty well-known seed breeder who's selected some crops and bred some crops that we grow down at the farm. He came from Shively. So we do about 4 to 6 acres in produce. Roughly about 3 of that is dry farmed, and then 18 acres in alfalfa that's dry farmed. It's a pretty amazing sight to see because I think we're in a really optimal area with adequate rainfall, great topsoil, being located near the river. It really does some impressive things. So we do a lot of the crops that were previously mentioned: corn, cucurbits, tomatoes, eggplant. And yeah, that's what I've got so far.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Silas. And thanks to all of these incredible farmers for being here and being willing to share what they've been learning. So last but not least, we're going to have Jared, and then I guess me, present a little bit more on the research side of things. So Jared, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Jared Zystro. I work at Organic Seed Alliance. We're an organization that supports the diversity and supply of organic seed and sustainable seed for farmers. And we do that through things like our participatory research, through education on topics around seed and plant breeding and trials, and through policy advocacy, supporting the rights of farmers to be able to save seed and protect them from things like GMO contamination. I have had the privilege for a while now of being in Humboldt County and working with farmers in the Humboldt County region on various research projects. And many of the farms that I've worked with and on have had dry farm practices. And so kind of through that, I've had the opportunity to do both plant breeding and seed production research on in different dry farm environments. I don't know if we want, Yvonne, are you thinking you'd like me to present a little bit of what I've learned from that?
Yeah, I have all your slides here, so just let me know when
Okay.
you're ready to advance.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can advance them. I didn't put a lot, I think, in these slides because they were just intros. Yeah, as I said, this is what Organic Seed Alliance does. We work to ensure abundant, diverse supply of ecologically grown seed tended in perpetuity by skilled and diverse communities of seed stewards, and do that through participatory research, practical education, policy advocacy, and network development. Next slide. So yeah, some of the different plant breeding work that we've done. So with the goal of developing varieties that are suitable for organic agriculture and meet the needs of organic farmers. Some of the different crops that we've worked on here on dry farm sites in the Humboldt County area have been things like corn, sweet corn in particular, tomato breeding, quinoa breeding. And then in addition, this last year, if I want to go to the next slide, something that we did in conjunction with Silas at the College of the Redwoods farm there is we wanted to do a little more of a systematic look at thinking about seed production, because that's something that a lot of the people that we work with care about, and it's something that we support with research, and there's not a lot of research out there looking at seed production under different irrigation systems, including dry farming. So at CR, the College of the Redwoods this last year, what we set up is this replicated trial looking at focusing on seed yields in particular, but looking at different varieties of summer squash, of dry beans, and of tomatoes, and comparing different varieties under different, under what's called here low, but basically under dry farm conditions, as well as infrequent irrigation and then more regular drip irrigation. And some of what we learned, I think in addition, we also installed moisture monitors in the soil at our trial site here. And some of what we learned was, first off, that last year, and Silas will probably go into this, in general, the Shively and the College of Redwoods farm has is uniquely well situated for dry farming due to the both having deep silty soils, which have high available water holding capacity in general, but also the fact that they experience a decent amount of sub irrigation, essentially based on their proximity to the Eel River. The water table there remains high even going in and through the summer. And in particular, last year was a fairly wet late spring and not an extremely hot summer. And so looking just even at our moisture meters, what we saw was that, well, there the surface foot and down to 2 feet, began to dry in the non-irrigated plots. That below that, there's still basically the same amount of water available to the plants across whether we irrigated or not. So, with that being said, what we still did see was that first off, for certain crops like the dry beans across the board, the different varieties we grew all really responded to receiving additional irrigation. So we irrigated, when we irrigated, we either turned on the drip once every 4 weeks for a 2-hour set. That's kind of what we call the medium there, or once every week for a 2-hour set. And the dry beans yielded, they yielded about 30% better with the every 4-week set compared to the dry farming, and about 60% better with the every week set. So they, even in what I would say was a pretty, relatively late wet year with pretty ample water relative to other years, and also in a pretty, friendly dry farm site, the dry beans still yielded a fair bit more under irrigation than they did. These, had been selected, at least in part, under organic conditions and under dry farm conditions, those dry beans. When we looked at, I'm happy to send the list of varieties that we grew to. I just didn't want to take up too much of this panel's time. When we looked at summer squash, we did see an interesting thing there where certain varieties were much more stable in the fact that they continued to yield consistent, they yielded consistent amounts of seeds, at least, which is what we're looking at, regardless of whether they were fully dry farmed or received that once every 4-week irrigation, or they received the every week irrigation. Some varieties really respond, whereas other varieties really responded to the irrigation, and without the irrigation, they yielded fairly poorly. So that was a crop, at least in this year, at least with the varieties that we grew, where it was the variety choice really made a difference in terms of if you were growing in a dry farm situation, some of them would maintain their relatively good yields, and some really fell off. Then the third crop we grew, the tomatoes, in that case, what we saw was less response to, one, the data was a little fuzzier in general because we had a lot of crow damage on the tomatoes. But also what we saw was that the differences between the varieties in their yields was significant, but that regardless of the varieties, again, in these conditions, we weren't seeing large yield differences based on whether they were irrigated or not. All the tomatoes were, as well as the squash, were selected to be ones known, expected to perform well in dry farm conditions. So that was a little bit of what we did. Again, this was looking at particular seed yields, and it was in this year, this particular site in this particular year. What I think that some of the takeaways for everyone is that identifying the varieties that you that perform well in your particular site, if you're going to be dry farming, is going to potentially have a large impact. And then secondly, I think kind of what Blake was alluding to there, which is that, depending on your your circumstances, your availability of water and your economic circumstances, that the choice of irrigating or not is, that can have impacts on yield, and that's a decision that you'll need to weigh when you're deciding what crops and how you're going to manage them. And so dry farming has a lot of pros that you've heard, but also taking those economic considerations into mind is important. I think I'll leave it there for now. We can certainly talk more during the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jared. And yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk about not just the sort of on-farm management, but also I think the economic and marketing side of things is completely crucial to making dry farming actually work for an operation as well. So excited to touch on that in the panel. The last little bit of the presentation here, I wanted to, formally introduce myself. I'm Yvonne Sokolar. I'm getting my PhD at UC Berkeley in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. And I have been doing research with dry farm tomatoes, mostly in the Santa Cruz area on the Central Coast here in California. These are photos of all the fields that I was working on. And I like to brag that I think every single one of the fields that I was on had a view of the ocean when I was working there. And that's fun bragging rights for the lab. And also, I think also helps to illustrate the point of how important that coastal influence can be in getting a climate that'll actually work for dry farming. And instead of going through the full sort of research talk and slides and everything, I just wanted to pull out some important takeaways that I've learned from these field experiments that I think are hopefully directly applicable to farms and farm management, and more than happy to talk about how we actually got these results, as that is interesting to folks in the audience. I think the main things that we are seeing so far, some are like pretty self-evident, and you don't really need a scientist to tell you that you have to target a balance between yield and fruit quality. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the practices that increase yields tend to decrease fruit quality. And a lot of that is just because part of what makes a dry farm product delicious and wonderful is that you're stressing out that plant. So the more you stress it out, the higher the quality and also the lower the yields. I also found that the only nutrients that actually really matter in terms of affecting fruit yields or quality are ones that are below at least a foot deep into the soil profile. And so I think that makes some intuitive sense when you think about these dry farm systems. Water is drying down pretty quickly in that top foot of the soil. And so plants just aren't able to access, they're not putting energy or resources into roots that are up there. And they're also, the soils are too dry for those nutrients to even mobilize. So thinking about nutrient management, it's really only nutrients below 30 centimeters or a foot. And actually for yields, it was only nutrients below 60 centimeters. So 2 feet down and deeper. That's the nutrients that the tomatoes are actually accessing and have an influence on yields and fruit quality, which is also a bit of a conundrum in thinking about, how do you manage how do you manage nutrients that are down 2 feet in the soil? It's sort of a different paradigm from how you might otherwise think about nutrient management on a farm. We found some interesting results with nitrogen that I won't get too into here, but interestingly, we found that though higher ammonium levels increase fruit quality, they actually decrease fruit yields, and whereas higher nitrate increased fruit yields. So finding some interesting nitrogen dynamics going on here, and also found that ammonium increases blossom end rot, whereas nitrate decreases blossom end rot, which with tomatoes is one of the bigger concerns, especially in these water limited contexts. Blossom end rot can be a real concern for tomato growers out here. I was also testing out arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi as an inoculant, and can very quickly say that it seems like it makes basically no difference whatsoever. Can't say that I would recommend trying AMF inoculants on your farm. And finally, we were looking at other aspects of the fungal community as well. And I'm finding this sort of dry farm fungal signature to soils. So the longer soils have been dry farmed, the more certain species are enriched in them. And it looks like the more of a signature that a soil has, the better the fruit quality, and also the better those soils are at avoiding like a complete yield loss. So there's some interesting results that have been coming out of this fungal community here too, that to me indicate that considering having full dry farm rotations could be advantageous. So rather than rotating between an irrigated crop and then dry farm crop and then an irrigated crop, if you're able to just have a whole chunk of your farm that is dry farm only, you might be able to sort of develop that signature better and get better dry farm results. So with all of that, I want to stop sharing the screen here and open it up to this incredible panel with some questions. And I've done a few panels like this before, and honestly, one of the questions that I find the most exciting and sort of interesting is just to start out by asking, what do you actually consider dry farming? I think that there's a whole spectrum of how much, like, can you use any irrigation and still call it dry farming? Can you define a cutoff between this was dry farmed and this was not dry farmed? Or would love to hear any definitions that you might have of what dry farming actually is. So maybe we can start out going in the order that we got introduced in, but also feel free to jump in and add to what folks are saying. But that means that Jim will be starting off with you.
Okay, yeah, it's always a good question. And it's, as was mentioned earlier, I mean, it's really about, for me, dry farming in our region is about capturing winter rains, holding it in the soil, planting after the rains stop in such a way that you're planting into soil that's been managed appropriately to hold the moisture. And you're planting, in our case, with tomatoes is the main crop. Transplant the tomato into the ground, get the roots into that moisture without any irrigation at all, which we can definitely do on a year like this. And then that tomato doesn't see any rain or supplemental irrigation whatsoever. Now I will say that over the course of the last several years of pretty extreme drought, since 2017, or when was it? Yeah. Well, I have had, for the first time in my life, I've had to go in with a one drip irrigation at time of planting, just to make that connection, because the soil is just too dry at the surface. And then the other aspect of this that is interesting is just the challenge, and this maybe is one of your questions, but definitely one of the challenges in doing this type of a production system is in maintaining your winter rains such that you don't lose them to evaporation prior to planting, which typically involves planting into a cover crop field, terminating and incorporating the cover crop at the appropriate time to eliminate any evaporative loss of moisture, and then planting into that moisture. So anyway, that's my answer. Thank you.
I guess I will add, I think, Jim, you've said I think a lot of what it sort of dry farming has meant for us, especially, right? I think I could think about my start in growing in this area was around 2016, 2017. So I feel like that was, you just had to water in a dry farm tomato at the beginning to get established. But I guess I maybe stepping back a little bit, I see dry farming as part of a broader like framework for managing your resources. And for us is right, the building of soil in order to increase that water holding capacity. The timing of the rain is what makes it such that maybe we do need to water in at the beginning. But it's like a long-term, it's not like a season, there's like the seasonal management, and then there's the like long-term management of a field so that you could do this, like that ability increases from season to season, which, right, someone mentioned having to move from different fields, that's made it difficult for us too. And as we rotate, even within the same field where we do the dry farming, we found like varying levels of success in our production. So that's something that we're considering as well. Yeah, so it's right. I feel like I'm curious on what's the threshold of water that we're defining, but I guess it's more of that of the approach. And in our case is very much also looking at the quality, which right, it's a very particular to having less water. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
So I guess I'm next. Is that right? Okay. The my definition of dry farming is no water, no extra water. That's my definition. But I also, like, on our farm, we're constantly trying to be better farmers, better stewards of the land. So I'm always researching whether it's terms like permaculture, regenerative farming, no-till, and every time I research one of those other topics, and it seems like those ideas, like if you're not 100% no-till, you're disregarded, and so I really hate when other people say it's all or nothing, so really, like, it's all about, making a living farming. It's about, getting it to market and year after year, and having a product that people come back for. So, that's how you make a living. But then how do you care for the land? You use your resources wisely. So dry farming, I'm constantly trying to increase my organic matter and the fertility of my soil, but not, overladen my land, so I have runoff and leaching, the dry farming just works. It's just dovetails with that. Every time you irrigate, you're activating your upper layer of microbes, you're compacting your soil, you need to get your tractor, your crew out there to cultivate, and every time those microbes are activated, you're burning through your carbon in your soil. That's what all the microbes are eating. So, for me, it's like, I would rather, I want the highest quality crop possible. Through dry farming, I figured out how to get the sweetest melon or the best corn. Things like the corn, I'm pretty sure I don't have a loss in quantity. The way my ground is, like, I get great yields. I know with my melons, my melons are a little smaller, but something about the dry farming, like, I have pictures of, I have a great picture of my Alice Chalmers G that I parked, and the melons overtook it with vigor. And the amount of melons like dripping off that tractor was amazing. So, the fact that I've never grown melons with irrigation, but I'm happy with it. Also, the dry farming, and this is probably another topic, but like, I'm not running a crew. I have a 19-acre farm, and I have 2 hoes because hoeing or cultivating is so incidental. I haven't run my Alice Chalmers G in 2 or 3 years because it's just not necessary. And also, like, if you look at some of the pictures, like there's very few weeds on my farm without irrigation. I have a beautiful picture of, I finally got tired of unburying my ag pipe, my 4 and 6 inch ag pipe from the blackberries. Every year I'd have to dig it out and move it and put it in a pile somewhere else. So I actually brought it to the recycling center. I have this beautiful picture of a bin of aluminum pipe, and I'll never use it again. You know, I just got to that point. And the, you know, we market 100% of our product within Humboldt County. And I finally got to that point where I'm like, I don't need to get any bigger, you know? So I think like dry farming can help you on so many levels. You know, labor, keeping your costs down, keeping your soil fertile, increasing your organic matter every year with cover crops. It's, you know, I don't want to be a purist about it. Like I said, I do, the one thing everybody goes for is dry farm tomatoes, and it's the one thing I don't dry farm. So for me, with growing a lot of heirlooms, I like getting a good harvest period. Once I start harvesting, you know, 4th of July, I like to make it to October. We do two successive plantings. That's how we get our tomatoes to do that whole season. But like, but having that little extra, I bury drip tape underground so I can use as little water as possible. But it is something I do give them, you know, and it's crazy. We figured it out to like 1 cup of water per plant per week. That's about what we water. But that's not dry farm.
Yeah, technically.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jacques. Blake and Silas, anything to add?
I guess I would just say, yeah, the definitions, you know, obviously in a climate that rained all the time year round, dry farming wouldn't mean much. And, you know, of course, we sometimes do, even in our climates that we're farming in, we sometimes will get rains in the summertime. And yeah, just even if somebody's just incorporating dry farming in part of their, you know, the cycle of a particular crop, it still has validity and maybe a reason for being there. And so I don't know if the definition is, it can be a very loose definition. And yeah, there's so many reasons you choose to dry farm. And I think, yeah, the beyond, yeah, so many reasons. Weeds, quality of the soil, fits into your rotation, maybe the nutrition, you know, more dense, more the taste. Yeah, so many different reasons you choose to do it. All right, that's it.
I would just add that I think, you know, I've seen some different definitions, but I think it's fair to recognize that you might need to irrigate at the beginning when you're direct seeding or transplanting. I do think that's something that can be learned, though, to try to avoid that, depending on soil prep and trying to retain that moisture. But, you know, if there's people on here that are thinking about trying it, you know, I wouldn't be afraid, you know, to irrigate at the beginning to save a crop. Or also at times, we've had rain after direct seeding and we've had a heavy crust form, and then it gets super hot and those seeds aren't going to push through without some irrigation. So I think at the beginning it's fair. I know Jared just mentioned in the chat, Dry Farming Collaborative out of Oregon has tried to define it, maybe even have a certification out there sometime, so in the future.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. And we've had a few questions in the chat, and I think obviously a question on the top of everyone's mind is, what management practices sort of define dry farming? What do you find most useful in terms of dry farm management on your farm? I know that specifically cover cropping was called out, so if you can talk about that a little bit, and also I think someone mentioned dust mulching before, if you could explain that, and if there are other ones that we haven't mentioned that you find to be particularly influential in your dry farm success. And with this one, I'll just say, if you have a thought, unmute yourself and we can hopefully try to make it more of a conversation, although I know that I'll try to moderate as best as I can if that gets complicated with the Zoom format.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll jump in here real quick. I think the method that seems to be effective, that, well, it's a method that I've been using for 30 years, probably. Grow a cover crop, mow the cover crop in the spring. And that's, I mentioned earlier, that's the tricky time when you got to catch the moisture just right. You don't want to work the ground too wet. You don't want to work it too dry. You don't want that cover crop to remove any potential moisture that would be of benefit to that dry farm crop. So mow the cover crop, and then we use a mechanical spader. I used one at the UCSC farm. I used one here at my own place, just to incorporate the residue very uniformly. And then at the UCSC farm, we would typically just go through and form beds with a Lilliston, with a rolling cultivator. And then that was, in the ideal world, you'd get one more rain, you'd get a nice flush of weeds with those beds already formed. You'd have, a week or more, you'd have 4 weeks ideally of kind of breakdown time for that cover crop to break down. You'd get a flush of weeds, run back through with the rolling cultivator, take out that weed flush, and then you're good to go. And you're good to go that day, or you're good to go, 2 months later. It doesn't really matter, because the moisture is not going anywhere. And any subsequent weed growth can be managed with the rolling cultivator. So you're kind of just putting that plot of land in a holding pattern, and you can, because it's always good to do successive crops. So out here on my place, just to really simplify things, I just I mow the cover crop, spade incorporate, and then I built a little 3-point rototiller with J-tines and a bed shaper integrated into it. So I can just make a pass with that, and I'm pretty much ready to go. And then I would do a follow-up cultivation with the rolling cultivator once the crop is in the ground. And then, and then we can talk about kind of post-crop management too, but that's a whole different topic, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think everything Jim has said so far is spot on, and we use some of the same techniques. One thing I like to do, whether I'm doing when I'm doing successive plantings, like Jim was saying, leaving that bed formed. What I do is throughout the years, I bought a lot of equipment, and now throughout like my last 10 years, now that I kind of feel like I know what I'm doing, I'm actually getting rid of all that equipment. I'm going back to very, very simple things. So if I can't do it with just a few tools, then I think, oh, I must be doing it wrong. So I do the same thing. I let my cover crop flower. I use I mow it and I incorporate it. Then when I apply my, depending on the crop, like something like carrots, I don't throw compost. If I'm doing something like melons, I do. And what I'll do is I'll furrow down the middle of the row and apply the compost right in the furrow. And then I will make, instead of having a furrow, I will close it with my disc or a potato hiller. And I will make a hill the entire length of the field. And then I will leave it there until July. And that's, July 4th weekend is when I do my last planting of melons. So then I'll go over it with a basket weeder to make that seed bed. And I can, at that point, it exposes the moisture and I can plant right into it. And that's how I can be seeding carrots or anything in that. And then also the one thing that's different with that with corn is I'll use my furrower. I'll actually store the moisture in the soil just by having it basically flat, no hills. And then when I go to plant the corn, I'll furrow deep. I'll do a deep furrow and plant my corn in the bottom of the furrow. Then as the corn grows, if there is an incidental weed here or there, I will collapse that furrow. And then by the time if you can imagine, like you're planting your corn 4 inches deep, then your first cultivation might be to make the whole field look flat. And then your second cultivation might actually make it so instead of being 4 inches deep, your seed is actually 8 inches deep, and your roots are even deeper than that. So there's lots of little tricks like that to expose the moisture, to conserve your moisture. And the big one is that cover crop is going to help increase your water holding capacity of the soil. And that's a big one. And really timing it, I'd say the most important time is the springtime, incorporating the cover crop and saving that moisture, trying to keep that moisture in the ground. That's the biggest area of failure maybe with the cover crop incorporation and the moisture.
Right. Just to echo that, I feel like that ends up being like the most important decision to make of when it's too late and doing it at the right moment. To add something, just because I feel like, you both have covered really the basics. In the case of transplanting, like in the case of tomatoes, we really focus a lot on the vigor and of the actual plant. That's such a huge, we put so much energy into our starts and that they're pretty sized up in the case of the tomato. I've seen some tomato growers that are transplanting when they're pretty young still. And so we find that that's a huge part of the success of our crop is that time and dedication to the start.
We're a little different at our location. So we're typically rotating from an alfalfa stand that's been there for like 3 to 5 years. So there's typically the ground's pretty compacted, and we're using traditional tillage techniques to get that alfalfa out. So plowing, subsoiling, but definitely with the cover crop, there were some questions about what type of cover crops. For us at the farm, we use just a mix of oats and vetch typically. And then, just dealing with our unique situation with alfalfa, we like to do a light tillage in the fall, seed the cover crop to try to start killing that alfalfa, and then do the heavier tillage in the spring. But again, with like what Veronica was saying, the timing is really important. We have like a sweet spot in May where the rain's just starting to slow down, but the temperatures are still not out of control, and we're not losing that moisture in the top few inches. And I notice, at least visually, a big difference when I'm waiting and trying to get like some succession plantings going. Those crops that I'm trying to seed in June, it's a little more difficult for me.
Awesome. And if anyone had any, there is also a question about soil amendments or fertilizers. I know, Jacques, you were talking a little bit about compost versus not compost. Any other thoughts about what sorts of amendments you use and how you decide whether or not to put them on?
Well, go for it, Blake.
Well, I work and I just kind of came back in a few seconds ago. And I just wanted to say one thing about doing the dry farming in heavy soil. We have a very heavy soil that we use, a heavy clay loam. And so when we're working that, you end up with a lot of little clods on top. And so a lot of time, and we're really having to put a lot of effort in making sure we keep it very packed. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of airspace, and you really will lose a lot of moisture, except for that top little layer. So you want it really packed with heavy soil, except the top couple inches you want loose. And so we use a Schmeiser roller to accomplish that. But what will happen is we're getting weed strikes in, because a lot of our fields are very weedy. We're going into dairy fields that have been used for silage corn and things like that, have a lot of pigweed and mustards. And when we're getting our weed strikes, we have trouble keeping moisture in the top layer, because it can be dry by the time we're getting our weed strikes in mid to late spring. And sometimes we're planting our quinoa seed, which is tiny seed, of course, as you know. We're planting it sometimes 3 inches deep to get it down to moisture. So I just wanted to say, if it's all loose up top, that's okay. Loose and dry, the seed will come up fine through that. So just wanted to say it gets kind of goofy how deep you have to plant sometimes in a soil like that. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I jump in on the fertility question, Yvonne? I think, we had a pretty well-defined crop rotation at the UCSC farm for many, many years. And I think the way that we ultimately ended up kind of approaching fertility was put your compost out 5 tons per acre per year is kind of meets the needs, and then you get your additional nitrogen from cover cropping. And then if you just plan your rotation, well, and some of you don't have that ability, but if you are rotating dry farm with intensive veg production, the fertility that is in that intensive part is going to leach and move through the soil horizon, so that then when you come and do the dry farming, you can back off on the fertility, because as Yvonne's data clearly shows, the nutritional component is deep. So we've always thought of it kind of that way, that we kind of, you can kind of call a dry farm crop in effect a scavenger crop, because you are forcing those roots deep and they are picking up nutrients. There is some limitation because of the lack of free moisture at those depths, but I do think that it's kind of an interesting way to think about nutrient cycling. And then just one other thought that's kind of based on everything else we've been talking about. In those rotations, you will see very clearly, you'll know for a couple of years where you've been doing your dry farming, because there's no compaction. The soil's friable, loose, fertile, and weed free. So that's just, I just want to kind of toss that out there too.
Jerry, did you have something to add?
No, I just was wanting to make sure Blake had mentioned, because I know he's working on so many different soil types. It's helpful to hear kind of that perspective.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, and we also have been touching on this a little bit, but would love to have sort of your official take on what species are good for dry farming, and within those species, what varieties have you found that work particularly well?
Well, I'm happy to jump in quick here. With the dry farming, I've worked with farmers over the last 30 years. We've probably trialed 200 different varieties of tomatoes, including heirlooms and OPs, and I've trialed a number of varieties here, including New Girl and Dirty Girl, and the one that just beats everything for us in our region is Early Girl. And I hate to say it, because it's it's who owns Early Girl, right? So Jared, you got to come up with something. With beans, we've had really good luck with black turtle. With this, you can do any. I mean, just about all the hard squashes seem to perform really well in dry farming. And the one crop that I've had a tremendous success with. In fact, I'd almost put it in the category of cactus, and that's garbanzos. Extremely well suited to dry farming, and I'll say too, we did some sunflowers for the sunflower seed production, and I was surprised at how drought tolerant those crazy things were. I had no idea. and I'll say this too. We thought, oh well, let's dry farm popcorn. Might as well, because we know we can dry farm the Hopi white corn. And what we found with dry farming popcorn was that we had to hydrate it to get it to pop. And so now I irrigate the popcorn and it pops beautifully. So it's just one little thing to keep in the back of your mind.
I have something to add to that. Whenever I have had whenever I've had a crop failure with something like a squash, there's always a few. And I'm a big seed saver. And so we grow 8 different types of cantaloupe and muskmelon, and I save all my own seed. And it helps. Those are seed that are grown in dry farm conditions. So they have a strong tendency to have good root systems. So years ago, I got a watermelon through Fedco, and that they don't offer anymore. But the first year was a failure. I had a few that were shaped like footballs. They had pointy ends on them and they were a little squishy, but it was seed enough for the next year. I did that 2 years, and now it's just the most amazing seed. It also that seed was advertised as like 40-pound watermelon. And truthfully, very few people want a 40-pound watermelon, but a 5-pound watermelon people love. So I'm not sure if it's my seed selection or the fact that I'm dry farming it, but I have the thinnest skinned, dark red, crisp watermelon with these tiny little black seeds that are crunchy and nutty. They're not like wood chips at all, but like saving your own seed is magic with dry farming. So, and it was very interesting when I first met Bill Reynolds. I didn't know, I knew Bill as a legend in our community, but I didn't know, and I knew that he grew for Seeds of Change. And back then I was buying some things from Seeds of Change because they were so good that I didn't think I could do them as good. And then also they were crops like pepper seed or whatnot that I grew in communities. So I knew they were cross-pollinating. So I wasn't quite saving my seeds. And then also I was like, well, geez, I'm getting such good seeds through Seeds of Change. So we were at an Organic Seed Alliance field day down in Shively. And as I started mentioning, and Steve Peters was there as well, and he worked, he was the farm manager for Seeds of Change. And I started mentioning, I was basically pumping him up to be my friend. And I started mentioning all these varieties that I loved of his, and every single one that I grew that I liked came from Bill Reynolds and Shively. They were all grown, dry farmed, and it was just shocking and that's a different soil type. It's very much a different climate, but because they were dry farmed, they had a strong root system. And I grow those varieties to this day. Now I'm saving my own, but if you can find a seed purveyor who's dry farmed, or if you can, I'm lucky enough that I have my farm down the road and then I have my backyard. My backyard is isolated enough that I can grow a melon there, and I'll grow that seed. It's very interesting. I'll grow that seed. I'll grow enough seed for 8 years. And even at year 8, if I'm trialing some other thing from Johnny's or from, whoever, whatever other, I always notice my cotyledons, my seed emergence is quicker and my cotyledons are bigger. And I'm more successful. So I think seed is huge. Growing your own seed is huge. And then back to compost. For the longest time, I used a composted chicken manure that was brought in by semis. We're kind of, always trying to change things. So now what we're doing is we've gone through the whole soil food web with Elaine Ingham, and our farm is now producing biocomplete compost, which is actually not very high nutrients, but it's very high biology. So that's what we're going for now. So we're trying to have, more persistent biology and carbon in our soil, and trying not to leach a lot of nutrients. So, and in either way, I always felt like if I didn't allow, if for whatever reason the chicken compost was chunky, or if I didn't allow enough time for it to mellow, a lot of times I felt like I would actually, I would get things to germinate, and then I would see my melon plants die. They'd get one true leaf and then die. And a lot of times I associated with that to, my composted chicken manure was too hot, too many salts, it dried it out, didn't allow that root to go down quick, strong, and deep. So last year we did, our whole farm with our homemade compost, and I had amazing success, and I really couldn't tell the difference as far as quantity, but I did notice that I wasn't having hot spots in my field, which was nice.
Awesome. I love the plug for seed saving and locally adapted varieties. It's always amazing to hear how well that works. I'm recognizing that we're getting already close to low on time here. So I want to make sure that we address the sort of marketing and economics question, and then we'll open it up. I know we've been trying to answer audience questions as they come in, but if you want to put an official question in the Q&A, I'll try to make sure that it gets queued up to get answered by the panel here. But first, want to ask everyone, how you think of sort of marketing and economics in terms of dry farming on your farm, what marketing strategies have worked or not worked, and how the price and economics of the system sort of pencils out for you on your farm.
I'll start again.
Well,
At the UCSC farm, with the dry farm tomatoes, we did a lot of kind of economic analysis of time and labor and resources, and it always those tomatoes, because we could get such a premium price and people were so anxious to buy them and would line up at the farmer's market. It was always a phenomenal moneymaker. I'm not so much a commercial operator anymore, so I will pass on the question.
I mean, for us, similarly, I feel like dry farm tomatoes in this area have that reputation, and I think it's sought out. We are a wholesale business-to-business operation, so we don't have the advantage always of speaking directly to the final consumer. So I think it's us doing that work to talk to the grocery, the market that is purchasing the product. But yeah, with the tomato, I feel like there is enough of a reputation. For other crops, right, I think then the equation will turn more into, right, it's a management question. It's to reduce our water completely. I mean, right now we save dry beans, potatoes, and a lot of our melon, winter squash seeds. And those are the ones where we're trying to reduce the amount of water that we are doing from year to year. But it's not something that we've been able to communicate in a way that allows us to charge a premium, or, you know, I mean, I guess it's part of our narrative, and hopefully the general perception that we want to convey that we are trying to manage the resources in a responsible way. But yes, there is much more work to be done there. I think if anything, the fact that we're saving seed, that's something that people are responding more to. But the dry farming, yeah, so it's curious to hear about a label or some sort of way of getting people on the same page of what that means.
I know for us, selling at the farmer's market, you know, we've actually had a sign that said, you know, dry farmed, and everything on our table, we put this sign, dry farmed, dry farmed, dry farmed. And for 20 years, nobody noticed the sign. And but they came back for the flavor every time, every week they came back for the flavor. And we recently, I think with some of the efforts of like the Oregon Tribe Farming Collaborative, and then also some other farmers in our farmers market organization, like New Moon Farm, it's become more popular to say like, hey, I'm dry farmed. So people are asking, you know, much more about it. One thing I know though is that like, if you're certified organic and people ask you, hey, are you organic? The answer they want is yes. And they don't want a long explanation of how expensive it is or how much book work it is, and that's why you don't do it. They just want to hear yes. And so with dry farming, like we now have little pamphlets with information that we can give people, and we try and pass on that knowledge. But you know, people want something quick and easy to digest. So a lot of times if people ask, you know, what is that? I'll take the time to explain it, but really like the flavor. I mean, one of the reasons we have 18 different types of peach. We have 15 different types of pluot, you know, 8 different types of melon, you know, 15 different types of tomato, everything I just mentioned, and then sweet corn. That's what my table is all summer long. And that's because it's it's sweet. And dry farming, like I think if I was a lettuce grower or quinoa or something like that, people might not notice it as much. You know, you can grow those things dry farm, but I don't know if people would be like, wow, that's incredible lettuce, Jacques. So when it comes to sugar, sugar sells. Sugar, people notice how sweet dry farmed fruit is. So it's my secret. Dry farming is like my secret. I also, you know, you keep on mentioning coastal climate, but really like I'm similar to the coast where, yeah, I get a lot of rain in the winter, but I'm a desert in the summer. It's 105, almost, you know, it's 100 degrees every day out here. And people like Jared come out and only spend an hour or two before they have to find the river. It's a really hot climate out here. I would like to see a lot more people trying this in places like the Sierra foothills. I'm not on the river bar. I've farmed shaly hillsides around here and been successful with dry farming. I am on some of my land is bottomland. My row crop area is bottomland, but like I'm on a knoll with my orchard, and that's why I put an orchard there, right? So there's dry farming, you know, the best thing is just, you got to try it. Don't do small, like it's got to be a, you know, 150-foot row. It's got to be an acre. It's, yeah, if you're trying to dry farm in a backyard, that's hard. That's really hard.
Any other thoughts on marketing or economics?
One thing I would say. Hello?
I think it's working. Go ahead. Sorry, Blake.
Okay, great. One thing that I find to be incredibly helpful and amazingly interesting is farming books from like the teens, the 20s, and the 30s. Especially because basically all over the country, people were dry farming. And I know it means something different everywhere, but it's just spoken of not like a concept like this. It's just the way everything was being done. And so those books from that time period are incredibly interesting because they talk about how to manage the soil in different ways, you know, with the dust mulch, with cultivation. Of course, they really believe in a lot of the is very huge, and to help continue to waking up. Even though I don't know about that myself, but we've definitely seen different when we grain drill quinoa and when we plant it in rows. And when we plant in rows right next to an area of the field that we've done with the grain drill, the cultivated stuff does much better. And they're both being dry farmed, fertilized, everything the same way. And so there is something to cultivation too, and that's something old books talk a lot. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake. And also definitely appreciate, Jacques, the call for trying to expand this beyond sort of the defined borders of where dry farming is possible. I think you're totally right. And obviously the proof is in the pudding that this is a practice that can be expanded much more broadly than sort of the regions that might currently be considered. So in the last 10 minutes here, I want to get to these audience questions. And the first one is, what is the proper way to transition to dry farming from conventional irrigation practices?
That's a tricky question. Because it all depends. It depends on your soil type, the depth of your soil, your climate, your cropping system, how much water you have been using historically. Yeah, when people ask me, you know, do you think dry farming would work on my place? I say, well, there's one way to find out, and that's just plant something and don't irrigate it. And I think I would still say that or suggest that to anybody who, and I will tell you this from my experience, you will always be surprised at how well crops do on a reduced irrigation regime. So maybe that's a starting point, is just try, if you're calling it conventional irrigation, if you're irrigating your crop, just do deficit irrigation on a portion of it and see how it goes. And like somebody else mentioned too, I think you can't just do it on a small scale, because the roots will move into an area that's irrigated. So you do need some significant separation. You know, I mean, you need like 20 feet, because the roots will, we've done a number of trials, you know, we do irrigated next to dry farmed, and the irrigated stuff, or the dry farm stuff will get us roots right into the irrigated stuff pretty quick. So yeah, I think just trial and error, try it. Don't go too big the first year, test it out, test the waters, try some deficit irrigation. That's best advice I could give.
I think also, like, know your plants, you know, like in my climate, when it is 100 degrees, nothing is going to look happy. You know, you're going to see your leaves starting to fold. You're going to see, you know, wilting. You'll see that. But if you come back in the evening when the plant has had some recovery time, you know, if that plant is still looking drought stressed, it needs water, you know, whereas, you know, we actually had an agronomist come with a $10,000 weather station with soil probes. And it was really interesting how very quickly in the season, he would send me these graphs saying, and he's got some, you know, he's got these soil probes and weather stations all over Humboldt County. And he's like, oh, you got to water, you got to water, you got to water. And you know, and I wasn't even near thinking of watering. And so it was really easy for me to say no. And then he's like, well, you know, down in Shively, those dry farmers, you know, that the meter gets down to 150 and it just kind of goes like this, but it, you know, you're way below that. And I would just go out and I'd be looking at my plants. And that's what told me when, you know, do I need to irrigate, you know? And I was really, it was very interesting that, you know, my soil is different. You know, like right now, I do not drive a tractor on the farm. I do not drive a truck on the farm. If I need anything out there, I walk out and get it. Everything is in cover crop. When I go in the springtime, like we're all saying, it's very important that you preserve as much moisture as possible, but that doesn't mean you go out and get mud on your tires. Like that's the worst thing you can do for your soil and soil compaction. And how deep does that soil compaction go? So you really have to understand your soil and be as kind to it as possible, because it's all riding on that. So the, you know, go for it with the dry farming. You know, I've heard in other dry farming workshops, you know, they've said it's got to be 4 feet deep, but you know, it doesn't have to be on. I'm on a silt soil, silt loam, but a silt. You hear other people on clay or how well a sandy soil works. So, and then that I rented a field that had a sloped shale acre on it. And since I was renting it, I figured I might as well farm it. And I ended up getting a beautiful dry farmed melon crop out of that.
I think you froze up there on us, Jack, but let me know if you want to butt back in.
Get properly. And then, you know, please, like, you know, share your successes.
Awesome. Let's see. Next question is about research. So any top priorities for future ag research on dry farming? What key questions could scientists help answer through field trials in collaboration with small farmers? I think this is from a researcher who asked, how can we support?
I mean, I think the researching into drought-resistant varieties, that's always, I mean, a big part, and I very much of what we do as farmers is try things out on our farm. But it's always great when you have an additional trial sites, right? And get a little bit more information from sites in your area. And so, right, and maybe work with the actual farmers to see what are they interested in, what are the things that they're already trying and looking into, and maybe need additional information. And I don't know, the seed saving, which I think is such an important thing that we're doing. I don't know if this is a research question or just a capacity question, and how can we increase capacity of doing that more easily in our regions and on our farms. Yeah.
It's interesting. You'd think we'd all be like just coming up with 100 things to research, but we're all sitting here going, well, I don't know. Yeah, we're just keep doing it. And I think, Yvonne, your work is exceptional. It's a good example, I think, of participatory research where farmers had input, you answered a bunch of questions. I think the mycorrhizal thing was really interesting, and I'm guessing maybe, Yvonne, you could probably answer that question maybe better, or Jared maybe better than some of us farmers who are just kind of, I mean, like Vero said, we everything we do is kind of research based in a way. I mean, it's all about trying new things and seeing what works and what doesn't, and being very observational in the process.
Yeah, and I do think that one thing that is even coming up today is there has been a lot of trial and error from farmers about sort of site suitability and what works and what doesn't. And I don't think that we have any sort of official guidance on, this site will work under these conditions, but if it's this hot, then you need at least this much clay, or, I think that there are some broader questions that are harder to answer just as an individual farmer doing your own experimentation, that research is particularly well targeted to these broader questions that can bring larger groups of farmers together and sort of start to tease apart larger regional patterns and questions. And yeah, I think in my experience, even if they're not on the top of everyone's minds right now necessarily, just having conversations with a lot of farmers who are trying to do this and asking, like, what could I do that would be meaningful in any way for your operation? And having those conversations is the best possible way to go about getting that research to happen. Yeah, Jim.
Well, and also, I mean, maybe this just goes without saying, but all of my experience with field research from Santa Cruz down to into the Salinas Valley with USDA, it just jumps out at me that the site specificity that each, and you probably noticed this too, Yvonne, in your work. I mean, each site is its own special little microcosm of different soil and different climate, and yeah, so I think that's maybe one of the bigger challenges of kind of looking broader at, well, what is an important research question? It really comes down to, individual farms. And so that, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. In the 2 minutes that we have left, there are like a lot of burning questions about cover crop mixes. So want to pivot to that. And maybe we'll end there on a very applied note. So people want to know what cover crop recommendations people have for different areas. So maybe this will be a nice way to close off the panel. We can just each go around and say what cover crops you use and where you're farming.
Yeah, I'm here right near San Juan Bautista on the central coast of California, and I have been using for years and years and years just the standard like cayuse oats, bell beans, peas and vetch, standard mix with somewhere in the 7 to 10% cereal. Otherwise, it'll dominate, and that just seems to work great for me. In other areas further south, like Salinas Valley, there's a huge reluctance to use legumes because of disease pressure, but that's because those soils are not functioning. So.
Same. Veg, oats, bell beans, similar mix.
Yeah, I use the exact same mix. If the rains come late, sometimes I throw rye in. It establishes better in cold weather. I've used barley as well. With that's actually what I'm using this year just as an experiment. And I think it's a South Dakota university barley, but and I'm loving it. So we'll see what happens. But I usually terminate my cover crop when the legumes flower is usually your highest carbon and nitrogen ratio. So the most nitrogen that stays in your soil, good organic matter that's not too, difficult to break down. So.
Yeah, I've used that mix too. In the last couple of years, I've used just oats and veg. And that was just a cost. I noticed like similar results with the vegetable crops, and that was more cost affordable. So just getting veg and oats, mixing them instead of getting like a pre-mix of those 4 things, but it's going to be, what's working for you, I'd say.
Howdy. We use red clover primarily. And really dense red clover. And we find that, we've got enough diversity out there just with the winter weeds, with the chickweeds, the mustards. And one more thing on the research thing. I would say that, I know that every site is so site specific that research almost is meaningless in a lot of ways. But I think the depth of tillage with dry farming is something that a lot of people talk about and debate. Some people feel that you have to go quite deep with dry farming. And I mean, of course, it's all soil dependent too, and some people don't go as deep. So that would be some place I would think research would be really appropriate to focus on, is depth of tillage. And all the way from really deep to, no tillage at all, of course.
Awesome. Yes, I feel like the no-till question is looming large these days. Jared, did you have any cover crop or other final thoughts for us?
Yeah, no, I mean, no specific opinion on cover crop beyond what, typically I'm working with farms and they're using the same mix that you heard mentioned here. Yeah, and then in terms of research, I think like everyone mentioned, site specific, I think that the idea of doing, I guess I'll make the same kind of pitch that Jacques made, that doing your, if you have the capacity to, doing your on-farm seed saving and selection is going to be something that can really give you a lot of benefits, especially in a situation like dry farming. You can imagine that most varieties that are being developed for, commercial agriculture are not being developed with, dry farm environments in mind. And so, both finding those varieties and then developing those varieties yourself, you're going to be able to see some real benefits there. Something interesting, I think, Silas, you had mentioned this yesterday, I think, when we were talking, but also I'd seen that OSU, Oregon State University, has been starting to look at more grafting for improving yields, in particular for tomatoes, but also at cucumbers in dry farming. And that's kind of an interesting area of research.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I know there were questions that didn't get answered. I know we have to wrap things up so that y'all can go to the next session, but I have my email in the chat here. So get in touch with me. I can definitely connect you to the other folks in this room here. So thanks so much for being here and looking forward to keeping the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you all to all of our presenters today. This was a really informative, deep conversation. And of course, it only scratches the surface. So I encourage everybody to follow up on some of those resources. Hopefully we can send an email with some more links and resources as well. I think the big takeaway here is trial and error. Give it a try out on your properties and share what you learn. So thank you again so much. We hope to see you guys at the next workshop and throughout the whole week here. So thanks again.